I think there's almost a bit of a stigma associated with having a graffiti tag that isn't a real word for some reason or another. And just to shut that down right away, all you have to do is think about all the really well-known graffiti writers and artists who have a real word as a tag name, and then all the ones who have a sort of made-up or weird graffiti name that isn't a real word. For example, on the one hand, you have artists like Berst, Serius, Sciz, who all have an actual word as a tag name. But then on the other hand, you have artists like Smoe, Rasko, and Soffles, who are using what I'd call at least a sort of weird graffiti name for lack of a better term. And then you even have some graffiti artists who are in the middle, such as Fat One from TMD, who uses sort of a real word but misspelled, or spelled a different way, I guess I should say. But what do all of those great graffiti artists have in common? Well, it's that it's exactly that. It's that they're great graffiti artists. And because of that, it should be clear that you can make awesome graffiti with just about any name there is. But as someone who's personally used sort of a weird graffiti name for over a decade now, I'm going to tell you the 4 biggest pros and cons of having a weird graffiti name versus a real word as a graffiti tag. And after hearing those 4 pros and cons, and a sort of bonus one I want to stick in there as well, we'll get to that, I think you'll sort of agree there's benefits to using both. But hey, that can certainly be a discussion that everyone can have in the comment section. Over the years, from having spoken to graffiti writers of all ages and skill levels, if there's one thing I've learned about their graffiti names is that everyone writes their name for a reason. So I would absolutely love to hear the reasoning you chose for how you got your graffiti name in a comment, whether you're a top level graffiti artist or someone just starting out. But in my mind, there is one big con about having sort of a made-up graffiti name, and there's also one major con that I hear most often about having a real word as a graffiti name as well. The first con is with respect to using a real name as your graffiti tag, and that is simply that no matter what word you choose that is pre-existing, there is gonna be someone else out there who writes the exact same thing. And in a lot of cases, there's gonna be a lot of other graffiti writers out there who write the exact same name as you. For example, there is at least one person who writes the name 7 in every single city across the world, I swear to God, including the city I live in, and he happens to be a massive toy. But that's not the point. The point is, the more people that have the same name, the harder it's gonna be to differentiate yourself from those other graffiti writers. And that becomes even more difficult when those writers are in the same geographical area as you. Some are more commonly used than others. For example, the name Astro seems to be written by everyone and no one all at the same time. Common ones like Bomber, Devil, Lord. Everyone knows about 10 different writers who wrote that at one time before they realized why it might not be the best. But yeah, you get the picture. There are more rare words that aren't used so commonly, but if it's a real word out there, I guarantee you don't have to look too far before you find someone else using that name as well. But on the flip side of that, the con of having a weirder graffiti name that isn't a real word is that it can be insignificant for a completely different reason. And that reason is you can't convey anything to the reader of the tag. To clarify, I'm not saying that you can't convey anything through the style of the piece, but through the specific jumble of letters you chose, like mine, Sciz, for example, you can't convey anything to the reader themselves, and it doesn't pack that sort of powerful punch that some graffiti tags bring that are real words. And that actually leads really nicely into the 2 pros of having a weird graffiti name and a more normal graffiti word as a tag. And they're pretty much the opposite of what the cons are, of course. So having a real word as a graffiti tag can be super powerful right away. For example, Berst. Now, he spells it with an E instead of a U, but as far as I'm concerned, there is no better graffiti artist to have the name Berst. His style pops. There's colors everywhere. There's craziness throughout every single piece that he does, and it is just an explosion of color every single time he puts spray paint on a wall. So in his case, the name Berst almost tells you something about the graffiti artist and his style. And that is what I'm trying to say the real pro is here of having a real word as a tag. Another name I mentioned in my 3 ways to choose a graffiti tag video is the writer Serius. Serius is a great name to tag already, but especially in the case of the guy who writes it, because as far as I'm concerned, he is a serious writer in pretty much every sense of the word. He's got mad ups on walls. So in both those instances, having a real word as your graffiti tag gives it that extra synergy, almost, I want to say. And I personally am very, very jealous of writers who get to take advantage of that aspect of their graffiti tags. But the other pro of having a weird graffiti name is, once again, the con of having a real graffiti tag. And that's that it's immediately recognizable as yours. When people see a tag that says Sciz, for example, my graffiti tag, there's not too many of us around who write Sciz. So it sort of helps to establish yourself in a sense, I suppose. But that is not the big pro of choosing a weird graffiti name. The big pro is something that I want to show you rather than just explain to you here. And that is simply that choosing a group of letters opens up a whole plethora of possibilities for arranging those letters and choosing ones that are going to be fun to work with. And here's what I mean. In an interview I did with Smoe, yes, that Smoe, on the channel here, a viewer wanted to know how he chose his name. And this is what he had to say about how he chose the letters in his graffiti tag.
My first name that I was painting was Anubis.
Oh,
yes. The god of the dead of the Egyptians. He has a head from a dog.
Yeah.
After a year, I noticed that I only liked the S at the end, but I wanted to have it at the beginning. And I come from a small village nearby Warendorf. Now I managed it to come in the big city. Now I am in Warendorf.
Okay.
It has 64,000.
That's the big city for you guys.
This is the big city,
Wow.
and I come from the small city. The small city is it's a village, and the small village is called Mössingen. And Mössingen has an M, so I wanted to have an S at the beginning, an M in the middle somehow, and an E at the end. And I was searching for different combinations, and somehow I decided to put the O inside there. And nowadays my kids have all these letters with their names. My daughter Elisa has the E. My son Oscar has the O. My son Matteo has the M. And the S is maybe for the dog or something.
Yeah.
But at the end it were just letters that I like.
Yeah. No, that's the way to do it.
Smoe has a reason for choosing each of the letters in his name, but he also was able to arrange them in whatever order he wanted. And he put them in a very, very strong order. I'll show you what I mean, and we'll jump over here in Photoshop. And this Smoe piece in particular really outlines a point I want to make. For example, having the letter O in a graffiti tag can be good or bad, depending on where you put it. If it's on one side or the other, it can be a little difficult to work with just because of the letter structure itself. Whereas if you're able to put it close to the middle of a piece, such as where this one is, the negative space in the middle of the O can be put more central and it doesn't throw the weight of the piece off too much. And because that general circle in the middle of the letter O is such a strong identifier of that particular letter, having it in the middle and balancing out the negative space allows Smoe to put whatever kinds of extensions he wants on the letter that are going to assist him directionally in the piece. So my point here is having a predetermined set of letters or order of letters in a word doesn't always allow you to have those possibilities that assist the natural flow of a piece like that. And we're also going to take a look at a Resk12 piece here because it also outlines just how easy it is to use some particular letters to assist with the more natural symmetry of a piece rather than figuring out a more contrived way to create symmetry. And I presume Resk chose his name himself. I don't know that for sure actually, but that's the assumption here. And in general, the letters R and K are very nice to work with together. And that is simply because they're almost the exact same letters. Other than the top of the K being joined like this to make an R, they're basically the exact same letter. So if we go back to that sketch right now, you can start to see right away the similarities in the structure of the letter R in this piece and the letter K. We can even break it down just by the different bars of each of those two letters. For example, the R here has a very big stick stretching this way to create that sort of shape that I'm showing you on screen right there. The K also has that shape right there. Furthermore, the part of the R here on the left side even curves directionally the same way as this K does right here on your screen. And just to even further hammer home that point, the top of the R here, that general shape right there is a very, very similar shape and size to that part of the K. And don't get me wrong, you can make similar shapes and sizes of those shapes with any letters if you're good enough, but having letters like R and K that naturally work well together definitely makes that easier to do within a graffiti piece. So in summary, to me, the full power of having a weird graffiti name or a made up name to tag is that it is fully customizable. And I hope looking at that awesome Smoe piece and the awesome Resk12 piece there as well gives you a bit of insight as to how you can use that to your advantage a little bit. You get to position the letters in a way that naturally assists the flow of the piece or the balance of it as well. And like I said before, sometimes it's just nice to have that happen more naturally rather than having to find a more contrived way to do that. Both ways are good though, and ultimately the bottom line is it's up to the individual graffiti artist to learn the skills and concepts to make great graffiti. In that sense, there really aren't any shortcuts, guys, and that's probably the main takeaway here, which I want to say very directly right now. But since I mentioned a couple times throughout this video, the video where I talked about the 3 ways to choose a graffiti name will be on screen if you did want to check it out, just since I mentioned it. And also, since we've done it now, I just want to say that the type of analysis that we did on the Smoe piece and the Resk12 piece, that's the exact type of constructive analysis that we do each month over on my Patreon. So if you are interested in learning artistic concepts in relation specifically to graffiti art to help you get better at graffiti, head on over and check out the Patreon. The lowest tier is I think $3 a month, and you get all the extra content over there. So I hope to see you in the video on screen now or over there. You can always subscribe to see more, of course. There's worse ideas out there, I would say, but hey, I'm biased. So I'll see you in the next one.